Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to our ritual night talk for January 25th, 2022. I'm Scott Stenwick, your host for these ritual night events, presented under the auspices of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I have included a couple of links with this video. The first is an overview of what I call the ritual template, which that is going to be our subject for tonight, or at least the subject I'm going to introduce tonight. It may take more than one video to get through the concept, and the second is a post that elaborated further on that called The Template Works for Everything. And that talks about the other thing about how the ritual template can be used not just for Thelemic or Golden Dawn magic or whatever, but for just about anything if you choose to adapt it that way. And in fact, this is kind of the idea behind this modern system of magic in the first place. We're going to go into that in a little more detail too. Also included the donation link to support Leaping Laughter OTO here in Minneapolis. All donations are appreciated. No donations are too small. And, we appreciate your generosity on whatever level you can offer it. So, before I get going any further, remember to like, subscribe, request notifications. Got to get that YouTuber spiel down. And so that way you will always know when we go live or upload a video here on the Leaping Laughter YouTube channel. Furthermore, feel free to comment after the video. I do try to do my best, if you look through the history, to get back and answer questions from viewers. And sometimes that will influence the course of subsequent videos. Now, this is actually one of those videos I have been asked a couple of times about how, looking at, I've been talking about the basic rituals, like the lesser ritual pentagram, lesser hexagram, middle pillar, greater pentagram, greater hexagram. So the question, though, comes up, and it's a completely reasonable question. It's actually a question that you can ask looking through a lot of books that are introductions to magic in terms of, all right, well, here are all of these rituals, but what exactly do they do? How do I put them together to make something work in terms of creating an effective ritual to produce a change in accordance with my will? And that's a great question, and that's the whole point of doing magic. So I wanted to talk today about starting off going through that process of how we actually take, a lesser pentagram, lesser hexagram, and so forth, and build it into a ritual that actually does something. Okay, as opposed to, you could do these rituals as daily practices. They're great for self-development. Your lesser pentagram, lesser hexagram, middle pillar, those are all great daily practices. But they also work for practical operations and for larger rituals. So that transition is what I want to at least start talking about tonight. So over the last, decade or so, there's been all this stuff going back and forth between, the modern magic, or Thelemic magic, Golden Dawn magic, Lodge magic, but what people want to call it, and grimoire magic. And often sides go back and forth. They argue about stuff. Generally speaking, you've got your grimoire purists who are like, oh, well, you got to take the grimoire and work with it, exactly as written. Don't do extra ceremonial forms or anything like that from Crowley or from the Golden Dawn, and just work through the grimoire as it is and work with the spirits. So that's kind of the grimoire purist perspective. Okay, now the modern perspective, though, is interesting in its own right, and I think it has suffered to a degree from some misconceptions that wind up creeping into these debates. So first and foremost, you should understand that Crowley did study grimoires. Mathers studied grimoires. They issued an edition. Mathers issued an edition of the Key of Solomon. Crowley and Mathers worked together, issued an edition of the Goetia. And Crowley was heavily influenced by the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, which those ideas were incorporated into the Thelemic system. Crowley also, to a degree, studied what we call the Greek magical papyri. And that is the result, why you see the Stele of Jehu, which is a Greek magical papyri spell. So Crowley first adapts it into the Bornless ritual, which you see in his edition of the Goetia, and then later into Liber Samech, which is his procedure for obtaining the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. And you look through Thelemic, it is basically the Stele of Jehu, with some of the verbiage changed around, broken up into elemental quarters and stuff like that. But it is, the text that he is working with is from the Stele of Jehu, which is part of the Greek magical papyri. So it's not the case that Mathers, Crowley, some of these magicians were completely ignorant to this stuff. Of course, they didn't have the same level of research that we have today. You can go out on the internet and you'll find, all sorts of, Joe Peterson's esoteric archives, you can find all kinds of stuff in that, right? And it's just fantastic. And, this information age has just been wonderful for, getting, the secrets of magic, out there, presented to the world in a form where somebody wants to go search for them, they can. And that's great, okay? This is, if there's a golden age of magic, this is it, okay? And so we see this thing where, okay, people are now having access to these original sources and going like, hey, we should work with these original sources, instead of, how magic has been taught and so on. But I also want to, which is fine, and that's cool. There's different styles of magic that work better or worse for different people. And I don't want to contribute to this debate by saying, the modern versus the grimoire purist is better or worse. I think it depends on the person. But there are a couple of things about the modern system of magic, that is pentagram rituals, hexagram rituals, and so forth, that I do see some misconceptions thrown around. And so the first of those is that, well, the modern system of magic is a psychological-only system. This is actually one of the big arguments in the grimoire community about how, well, Crowley has psychological this or that, and then Rigardi has this, but we're working with the grimoires, which is really talking about spirits, not psychological, whatever. And that's completely right in terms of the grimoires working with the spirits, and it's completely wrong in terms of the modern system of magic being purely psychological. The text that gets cited for that is Crowley wrote this piece for his edition of the Goetia called The Initiated Interpretation of Ceremonial Magic. And in it, he basically argues for kind of a psychological model of how the spirits they arise from, their portions of the human brain and stuff like this. And so that gets pulled out without the context of that was very early in Crowley's career. He had basically spent a few years working with the Golden Dawn, got involved with that Battle of Blythe Road thing, the battle between the London Adepts and Mathers, and then quit the Golden Dawn because he thought it was a waste of time. At that point, he'd spent several years, just doing like Buddhist meditation, thinking, he'd become a Buddhist instead, and so forth. And so we're not talking about somebody who had a lot of exposure to working with spirits. We're talking about somebody who had exposure to these, Golden Dawn dramatic rituals. I mean, probably some exposure to spirits in that context, but, not necessarily somebody who, was able to get onto esoteric archives and experiment with all the grimoires and put them all together and do all that kind of stuff. And it's important to note that the initiated interpretation of ceremonial magic was published earlier than Crowley's reception of the Book of the Law, which really kind of changed his whole perspective around. And so, later on, he's talking about Aiwass from the Book of the Law as a praetor human intelligence and things like this, which really pretty much sounds like an external spirit to me. And I have quipped that, Crowley didn't necessarily believe in external spirits until he met one. And then, his later work definitely does not show that, he's continuing with this initiated interpretation of ceremonial magic model. Another person who is, to a degree, responsible for this is Israel Rigardi. Israel Rigardi was a Reichian psychoanalyst. And there are some people who look at that and say, he was a psychoanalyst, without completely understanding what Reichian psychoanalysis was about. Wilhelm Reich is the guy who came up with orgone energy, okay? And in Freud's model of psychology, Freud uses this metaphor of energy to talk about emotion and motivation. Reich believed that was a real, tangible, subtle energy. Okay, so it was the kind of thing that you were manipulating if you were working with chi or prana or what have you. And so, on the one hand, while Rigardi was a psychoanalyst, he published books, he published, psychoanalyses of Aleister Crowley, which, I don't really buy psychoanalysis personally, but, and so people who are kind of down on psychoanalysis, and they look at Rigardi using some of these ideas, kind of forget that he was a Reichian analyst. Okay, and Reichians do believe that this metaphoric energy that Freud had was tangible energy. So in effect, it's like Rigardi really wasn't a psychological only magician either. He believed in this energy work kind of idea. And I mean, so Crowley, of course, took that and ran with it. One of the things that the Thelemic system does, I think, better than the Golden Dawn system is it brings in techniques like, prana and so forth from yoga to bring in a comprehensive system of energy work that makes a huge difference in how well these forms work. I mean, you can sit and trace a pentagram or whatever, but I mean, if you're really doing the breath work and all that kind of stuff in conjunction with the visualization, you get this full kind of thing that the Buddhists talked about with body, speech, mind. So you have the word, you have the visualization, and you have the things that your body is doing with the breath, and all of that stuff comes together to make a particularly powerful system of magic. And that brings me to what the Golden Dawn was actually trying to do, at least as far as I understand it from researching it. Maybe a Golden Dawn person can correct me on this, OTO initiate, not a Golden Dawn initiate, but based on my reading, and definitely what Crowley was trying to do from a Thelemic standpoint, and I tend to think what Crowley was doing, he was continuing some of the same kinds of things that the Golden Dawn did. I mean, Liber 777 was originally built on a set of correspondences he received from Alan Bennett when he was working in the Golden Dawn, and so there's history and so forth behind that. But what the modern Thelemic magical system is, and I'll say that because I'm an initiate of it, and I'll talk about it from that perspective, and you can decide to what degree it applies to the Golden Dawn based on your own experience, was an attempt to build a general system of magic for working with any grimoire and any spirit. Okay? I'm going to say that again. It was an attempt to build a general system for working with any grimoire and any spirit. Okay, and that's a tall order. That's kind of a big deal, right? Now, and if they got that right, I think I'm within my rights to say that is one of the coolest things of, the modern era in terms of magic, if that could be done. Now, some of the grimoire folks, they say, oh, well, that can't be done. The grimoires have to be used in this context and so forth. I agree that the grimoires can be used in that context. I don't believe it's the only way they can be used. And so that's why I come at it from more of this Thelemic generalist perspective. And so let me back you up a little bit more. So the early 1500s, you had grimoire, a lot of grimoires floating around like the late 1400s. And you had spirits and you had sigils. It was a basic idea, you would conjure a spirit, you would use some kind of a sigil for that spirit, you would call it, by a particular god name, maybe different god names depending. First call it by the name of God, then if it doesn't show up, call it by its king, There's some stuff like that. You've got grimoires like the Arbitel, where it's like everything is being called, in the name of Jesus, so Jesus is the controlling name, but then you've got the Olympic planetary spirits with their sigils, and so on. And Henry Cornelius Agrippa, in the 3 books of occult philosophy, published this model where you could take kamias, that is magic squares, which are their squares where they line up horizontally, vertically, and diagonally. And the horizontals, verticals, and diagonals all add up to the same number. It's a mathematical concept that reflects the sacred geometry of the number of the degree of the square. So 3 by 3 square is 3, 4 by 4 is 4, 5 by 5 is 5, and so on, down to 9 by 9. And so Agrippa took that, the scales of the numbers, and he attributed it to the planets, starting with Saturn, which is 3, which is the smallest kamiya you can possibly make that actually works. 2 by 2 does not work. And then followed it down in Chaldean order. So Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon. 3 through 9 with the magic squares. And then took the names of the spirits of the associated with those planets, and then created a sigil by doing gematria on the letters of the name and mapping the names onto the sigil. There's a whole bunch of examples of this on my blog. You can look at the planetary work posts I've talked about. Here's the name, it breaks down, here's the gematria, here's how you trace it. And then in addition to that, he brought in characters of each planet that reflected in some way the number pattern on the magic square. They're not completely regular, but it's kind of interesting. There's other places where you can find this, breaking down the kamiyas of, why, the 5 by 5, looks like this, or the 4 by 4 looks like, Jupiter, it's like a cross with a circle in the center, stuff like that. And you could look at that. It has to do with how the letters flow through the square. If you start at 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on down the line. Now, and this is interesting because this is a generic way of making sigils. You've got the principal qualities in Western magic. You have the 4 classical elements, possibly 5 if you're counting spirit as an element. And you have the 7 ancient planets, not including the outer planets, because we're talking the planets that could be seen with the naked eye. And then we have the 12 signs of the zodiac. So you have this 4, 5, 7, and 12 framework of powers that you're working with. And all of those powers can be mapped to one of these Kamiya squares, because the signs of the zodiac, they all have ruling planets, so you can use that Kamiya for them. The planets represent the number squares, you can use the Kamiya for that. And the elements I map to the Kamiya of the moon, because the elements are considered these kind of sublunar forces that make up the world. And the moon is the final dispositor of astrological or magical energy, and so that's why I use the moon. I don't make like a special. There have been a couple of examples of people trying to make 10 by 10 squares representing Malkut, mapping the elements to that. Haven't experimented with that. I can't say whether they work or not. I'll leave it up to people who do that and test it. I map them to the moon Kamiya, which is the 9 by 9, and they work fine. So that's my experience. And so once you have that, if you can identify the quality to which a spirit is attributed, you could create a generic sigil for them. So instead of going through books and trying to find an exact picture from the tradition for each spirit, which, by the way, still work. The point of the Agrippa model is to generalize the process. So all you really need is a spirit name and the kind of power they have, and that would allow you to come up with this sigil whether or not you had any kind of a traditional reference. This was a huge step forward in creating sigils for spirits. And you see some of it. Agrippa was one of Dee's sources. You can look, certainly like in the watchtowers and the aethers, you got this thing where you trace the names a certain way onto the grid, which is the watchtowers. It's not a magic square, but it is, you're making a grid of letters that have numeric values, then you're going around to the letters, and so forth. So, it's a similar idea, not exactly the same idea, but the Agrippa idea is really powerful, and it works for almost everything that I've played with. In fact, I think it has worked for everything I've tried it with. Some stuff I haven't tried it with, like the Enochian spirits, I haven't really done that with it, because the Enochian spirits, they have their own way of doing things, and that system is kind of more complete in and of itself. I don't like to cross systems as much. But this is a generic way to do sigils for any spirit. And then the other thing that you would need is, once you had that, then you could figure out, all right, so what is the god name that I would use to control the spirit or conjure you in the name of whatever. And then there's your sigil. You've got your character. And so, what you do with that is you make you could just make like a little, you make the sigil and put that over the character, and you can trace it in the right color. I do that from the modern system. Agrippa doesn't go into colors with the Kamiya system. But you have this little piece of paper. You do this on a piece of paper. You set that in your table of art. If you've got a magical link to your target, you set that in your table. And then if you have a talisman you want to empower, you set that in the table. And once you do that, this is going to allow you to call a spirit with the regular conjuration charge license to depart, and charge it to empower a talisman, or do something. You put a link to anything external that you want. Now, there's a couple of things that I have developed that I use in my practice that aren't necessarily covered in the more traditional Thelemic magic. I always use a containment structure. The one I use here most of the time is the Sigillum de Amath from the Enochian system. The Golden Dawn did talk about this, Sigillum de Amath. It's beeswax disc with this figure engraved on it. And the Golden Dawn did talk about it as, okay, so it's a piece that you can use as, a way to contain spirit. So, in a way I'm using it, kind of the way it is described in some of the Golden Dawn Enochian stuff that Rigardi published. So I'm using it to contain whatever I'm doing. So my sigil goes there, spirit goes there, and so forth. And this, by the way, yes, is one of the cases where I do mix systems a little bit. Because Dee was specifically told that the sigillum de Ameth was a structure through which no creature would pass. So technically, as I see it, that means you can do it with, just about anything you want. Also, you have like the names of the traditional planetary angels are in here. There's a bunch of other names that you find, in kind of more, more of like, the god name in Asaya, angel of this, angel of that sort of thing in 777. So I think it's reasonable. On the other hand, your mileage may vary. Another way to do this is you can use the table of art from, there's a table of practice from the Trithemian Art of Drawing Spirits into Crystals, which is published in the Agrippa's fourth book, which might not have been written by Agrippa. That's like a whole other thing. That's another thing that works, so you can use that as a circle. The point is, you have this containment piece here. I generally put it right in the center of the altar, and that's pretty much my temple setup. I have an altar, this thing on it, I'll have a couple of tools, I wanted a dagger, and from there, I can sit and I can take these ritual forms that we've worked with, map them with the template, and generically come up with rituals to conjure spirits from pretty much any grimoire, any source. The reason you could do that is because, so the foundational lesser rituals, the lesser ritual, the pentagram, lesser ritual, the hexagram, sets up your working space, okay? Once you set up your working space, you identify with the divine. You can use the middle pillar for that. You can also use something like the Bornless ritual for that, or the version of, or Liber Samic. You can use the text of Samic and aside, which is somewhat different from Crowley's Bornless ritual. It's not a lot different. They can be done in largely the same way. You're talking about identifying with the divine. In all cases, it's like, thee I invoke the headless or bornless spirit. What that is the dynamic ground of being. That is the totality of consciousness that pervades the universe, at least from the standpoint of panpsychism, which is my preferred paradigm. And so what you're doing is by identifying with that confers authority to conjure any kind of spirit, because the dynamic ground of being is the foundation of everything. Okay? And the middle pillar can be used in a similar way. You're going from Kether, which is unity, all the way down to Malkut, so you're going through the Kabbalistic worlds, and vibrating the appropriate God names and focusing those energies at the different points in your body. So you are embodying the divine. Once you do that, now you look at what is the attribution of your spirit. So I'm just going to say, let's say I got a Mercury spirit, okay? What I'm going to do then is, all right, well, so I'm going to do the greater ritual, the hexagram for Mercury, okay? And I'm going to do a sigil for that spirit. I can do a Mercury character piece of paper, trace the sigil over it. So, let's say we're calling the angel of the path of Mercury. I will talk more at some point about path and Sephiroth too, but not in this video. I'll get to that probably like in a part 2 or something like that, when we're talking about going into more detail about specific spirits. This is more like an overview. And so I'm going to take Raphael, angel of the path of Mercury, and I'm going to trace Raphael's sigil on the character of Mercury. So now I have my sigil. We're doing a path, so use the natural color for the path, which is the king scale, so that is yellow for Mercury. You put that in the center here, and let's say I'm conjuring it because I got a friend who's sick and I want to heal him. So I get a picture of the friend, set that there. I will get, and let's say I'm going to make a talisman, so I'll get a stone like an agate that's attributed to Mercury, and I'll put the stone there. And so I'm going to go through the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, the lesser invoking ritual of the hexagram, the middle pillar, the greater invoking ritual of the hexagram for Mercury, and then I'm going to do the conjuration, the charge, and license to depart for the spirit. So and the god name I'm going to use is the same god name that I used when tracing the greater ritual of the hexagram. And for the path of Mercury, it's kind of an odd sounding one. It's Azbugath, and it's based on the symbol. It's based on the numerology of 8. So it's like Az is 1-7, Beth Vav is 2-6, and Gimel Ha is 3-5. So each of the two, that's 8, and Mercury is associated with the scale of the number 8. Also, if you're a Hod, if you're looking on the Tree of Life, and so on. But it's scale of the number 8 in this case, because we're just working with the path. Okay? Now, so So I would be like, O thou Raphael, I conjure you by the name Osbaga, appear within this table of art, and thereafter attend to my behest. Something simple like that. Then technique that I've added, which I don't necessarily see other magicians of school use, but it works, is I vibrate the name of the angel a bunch of times. So vibrate Raphael, 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 until I perceive their presence. And you can perceive their presence different ways. Some people use a mirror, scrying, something appears, okay, then the angel's there. I use feel a lot. I'm more kinesthetic. And what I could feel, like, it's weird. It feels almost like a temperature or pressure change when the spirits show up. Like when I'm vibrating the name for the elixir rites, that's what I'm doing with my hands here. And so once the spirit's there, I say, O thou Raphael, by the name Osbaga, I hereby charge you to empower this talisman to heal, person XXX. And use an injunction. That's what I want them to do. Limitation is you will heal them, without causing, injury to them or their loved ones or damage to their property, something like that. That the injunction is what you want to tell the spirit to do. The limitation is what you want to prevent the spirit from doing. Healing spells, it's like there's only so much that can really happen, I think, with something like a straight healing spell. But it's good to keep the limitation in mind. You want to isolate any low probability pathways that could lead to, you don't want to deliver someone from suffering, and then the path that it takes is, it makes them sicker and they have to be put into a coma or something. You don't want that. Okay, so you want to make sure that, it can heal them of this in a way that does not, injure them, or, generally speaking, damaged property probably is not a big risk with this one. But sometimes with money spells it is. So anyway, so then, license to depart, O thou Raphael, I thank you for your presence, and I thank you for accomplishing this behest. I hereby license you to depart unto your proper place by the name Osbagan. May the peace of the eternal, true, and living God be always present between us, like an aum, and then a so mote be, okay? And you see me do that, in the elixir rites. So that's what I'm doing. And then finally, how you close the ritual. So, once the spirit has departed, you close the ritual by doing either the Kabbalistic cross from the lesser ritual, the pentagram. And usually if you're doing a talisman, you don't do it that way. But if you're doing a direct spell of I'm sending a spirit out to just do something, and it's something that you want to kind of stick to you and hang around, you do the Kabbalistic cross to kind of seal it into your aura, and your sphere of sensation, or whatever terminology you like to use for this, which is kind of your personal microcosm. If you want to send it out into the world to do something, you close by repeating the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, from the beginning of the operation. And what I do and I do it in place, and here's what I mean by that. So when I'm opening the temple and I do the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, I have the altar in the center, I'm casting a cross. I'm going to go this way, and then I'm going to go this way, and I'm going to walk all the way around the temple when I do it, and then come back. When I do it in place, I'm just going to do it like this, 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 this. Okay? I'm just going to stand here, because what I'm doing is I'm not doing anything to encompass the whole ritual. I'm separating myself from the form that I just placed into the talisman with the assistance of the spirit. So that's what that's for. And I think you will find, if you adapt that, you could pull out completely different grimoire, something that, isolate what the spirits are attributed to, and, go ahead and do the work. So that conjuration charge license to depart, that could be replaced by your entire grimoire operation, just as a modular piece that will drop in there. And then once you're done with that, with the license to depart, you close, any closing prayers, you just close with the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram. And so this is a way to do grimoire style work, which I do a lot. I work with spirits all the time. I am a great believer in the externality of spirits. I've seen too many things to believe that they're some kind of psychological projection or whatever. And so that is basically how you do it. If you look through the template, you can see all those steps. So maybe, if you're really interested in this, you can go back and take a look at that article and then read through the template as you're listening to the video again or something like that, to kind of get a sense of how this all goes together. It's a really impressive system. Now, a couple of little caveats. As this is a technology, certainly the argument is going to come up, well, how do you know that you can do that? Maybe you can't generalize it that far. That's why we're better off sticking with the historical grimoires. It's not necessarily an invalid argument. But my response is, the way that you work with a modern system like that is that you test it. And, the way that the system is put together, it has a great method for coming up with, a generalized way to deal with symbols and attributions and powers. But there's some stuff that, can be debugged in any technology. One of the things that I think I debugged out of this technology is the use of what I call an operant field. So instead of opening with lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, lesser banishing ritual, the hexagram, I open with lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, lesser invoking ritual, the hexagram. The idea is clear the microcosm, call in the macrocosm, so the two merge. And then when you tune your space, you're tuning both micro and macrocosmic energies. Then in the closing, I close with just the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, just to separate myself from the work. I don't want to banish any of the work I've done. I just want to separate myself from it. So I banish at the microcosmic level to do that. In a way, you could think of this structure as a little more like chaos magic than maybe what you've seen some Golden Dawn or Thelemic people do in other places, where it's you build it up, get the spirit, do the spirit, then you license the spirit to depart, and then you separate yourself. Kind of like in chaos magic, you'd open the vortex, maybe like do a sigil, and then you'd end with the banishing by laughter, which is just kind of detaching yourself from the operation. Lesser Banished Ritual, the pentagram does that too, and it does it in a formal ceremonial style. And so one of the issues that I had was the traditional way of doing it. So Lesser Banished Ritual, the pentagram, Lesser Banishing Ritual, the hexagram. I'm not sure if the middle pillar goes anywhere in there. The opening of a watchtower sometimes. Greater Invoking Ritual, the hexagram, your magical work, then Greater Banishing Ritual, the hexagram, Lesser Banishing Ritual, the hexagram, Lesser Banishing Ritual, the pentagram. It's like conjure up, conjure down. And that method, I found the conjure up and detach is a better method in terms of probabilities. Tested it against real world probabilities, it worked way better. And my theory is that, first of all, the operant field, by combining the microcosm and macrocosm, makes thought more easily translate into physical reality. Okay? So that's number one. Number two, it allows you to connect more easily with, the macrocosmic aspects of forces, which there is a psychological aspect of all these forces, of course, but we want to make sure that we're not working with only that. We want to make sure that we're working with the full macrocosmic resonance of that thing. And then finally, okay, you invoke, which is you tune the space so the spirit shows up. You're tuning it so the spirit will show up, then the spirit shows up, spirit does its work, you dismiss the spirit. You don't need to tune the space back. What you're going to do is you're just going to, all right, the spirit has departed now, and I'm just going to do Lesser Banished Ritual, the pentagram, to just kind of throw this whole thing into the operation. And I think that's why it works better. And then you don't do a macrocosmic banishing because you don't want to send any macrocosmic banishing after what you're doing. It should be noted that the method where you conjure up, conjure down, it does work better if you anchor with talismans, because the closing with the banishing hexagrams and stuff doesn't affect a talisman the same way as it affects an operation that's directly anchored to yourself. But I find that it's a good practice, and the differences in talisman power are small enough that I can't for sure say that one necessarily makes a more powerful talisman than the other. I have a working hypothesis, though, that it might be a little more powerful, in the sense that I'm taking all this stuff, and instead of individually banishing all these forces I've called in to support this operation, I'm detaching from it, so where it has to go is into the talisman. It certainly works that way when where it has to go is out into the world. So it seems to me that for a talisman it should be similar. And so I'm going to stop there tonight, trying to keep these videos, not too long, around 30 minutes or so. I'm a few minutes over tonight. But I'm going to continue talking about this, and I think maybe what I'll do next week is I'll do a general, actually sit down, okay, how do we actually build a ritual like this instead of just talking through it. I can go through the whole process and show you how it works. So with that, so we'll see about doing that next week. And with that, I am going to sign off here. Thank you all very much for watching, and have a great rest of the evening. Love is the law, love and your will.